Hello, guys.
What's up?
This is the Double Take.
Now we've obviously upgraded from the one camera setup to a three camera setup. We've also got the new mics, and today we're going to talk about the history of Hinduism.
But before we start, we would like to extend our deepest condolences to the lives that have been lost in the Palgam terror incident.
This is truly a sad incident and unprecedented, and we are truly devastated by this. And
But to further our topic, today's topic is going to be about history of Hinduism, which is deeply ingrained into our culture and our diversity. So, where do you think we should start with?
we should start by giving a brief overview of what Hinduism is really about before we get into the history of Hinduism, because it's a really complicated topic and we should have that little bit of knowledge beforehand. And we'll talk about its Vedic roots, its Aryan roots, and we'll go on that to how it affects us today.
So, to start with, we should firstly just define what Hinduism is. Hinduism, often or not, people believe that it is a religion where, just in a layman language, Hinduism often people believe that it is a religion where there are many gods in a way. But often or not, people do not realize is that it's not really a religion. It was considered to be a religion, termed as a religion, not by us, but by the Britishers who came and colonized us. But by a culture, it is defined as a way of life.
Right. It's really interesting to note that the word Hindu wasn't really even in the Vedas. The word Hindu actually came from the Persians. The river Indus, which was used to called Sindhu in ancient languages. The Iranians, the Persians took that, and since they couldn't pronounce the C, they just said Hindus. So Hindu was a term which was used to call any Indian that was living on the
Beyond,
east,
beyond the Indus River.
Indus River, right?
That's
And
interesting.
over time, when Islam took over Persia, this term used to denote any non-Indian, any non-Muslim Indian. So any Hindu, Buddhist, Jain, anybody who isn't a Muslim and living in India, they were called Hindus by the Persians in later years, like 12th century, around that time.
But do you think it was used as a derogatory term, like by non?
Somewhat a derogatory, not really a derogatory term, just a term with not peaceful intentions, really.
Okay. The Hinduism culture. So Sanatan Dharam is to know, or often or not said, the knowledge. And another thing is moksha, which is liberation, Vedas, which are some scriptures by historians and rishis that wrote our history. And what do you think is left now?
And we have the Brahman, which is essentially the universe and really everything in it. And it can also be interchangeably called God, but not really God. And
Could be consciousness as well,
yeah.
but could not.
And the three most important gods in Hinduism is Shiva, Vishnu, and the Brahma. The Brahma is known as the creator, Vishnu is known as the preserver, and Shiva is known as the destroyer.
So these are some terminologies that we'll be needing to use to further our topic for today, which is the history of Hinduism. So now we're moving on to the topic, which is, I think, the most relevant topic we should often talk about, which is the Aryan invasion theory. What do you think about that?
Yeah, this is the most controversial topic of this video. And as we've said before, that we have tried to keep our sources as unbiased as possible. But there's still that tinge of biasness, anti-nationalist or nationalist, whatever. So before we get into it, uh, let's just say who Indo-Aryans are.
Indo-Aryans are.
The Proto-Indo-Europeans. They lived in the Central Asia, the steppes, and they developed the chariot and the horse technology, and they were really a warrior civilization. And we know for sure that they invaded Europe, South Europe, West Europe, but we can't really say for sure that they did invade India
Or not.
or they just peacefully migrated here. What we do know is that around 2100 BC, the Indo-European gene starts appearing in the native Indians' DNA. So they started migrating here, and this, coincidentally or not, had tied with the fall of. We do know is that around 2100 BC, the Indo-European gene started appearing in the native Indians' DNAs, and so the migration happened around this time, the Indo-European migration. That because of archaeological evidences. In one instance, in this Harappan city, there was a potter's
Pottery.
workshop right in the middle of a street. This contrasted heavily with how developed the Indus Valley civilization was in the preceding millennia, and also the sewage system started faltering and just breaking down, and various other things happened. There are a lot of theories for why this happened. One is the Aryan invasion. They started attacking, the Indo-Europeans started attacking in the cities. That's why. Another theory.
But what I've heard is that they do not have the evidence enough to be clear.
Yeah, exactly. That's what I was talking about. We don't have conclusive evidence to say one thing happened or the other. We're just hypothesizing. Yeah. So another theory is that there were several spells of drought which caused the agriculture system to completely break down, resulting in the breakdown of the entire state and various other factors. So yeah, uh, this resulted in the Indus Valley civilization completely mixing with assimilating with the Proto-Indo-Europeans, and
Do you think because of this, our culture also kind of assimilated together, including our religion, culture, and our folk?
yes. So I'd like to get on to that. There were really three main players in the history of Hinduism as we know it today. One is the Proto-Indo-Europeans, one is the Indus Valley civilization, and the other is the native Indian folk religions. So these three combined to make what we know today as Hinduism. So these three individually played out, and they each have their own place in today's Hinduism. For example, Proto-Indo-Europeans had this is just an example. Dios, the sky god, right? Proto-Indo-Europeans worshipped him as their god, and they went to southern Europe, where in Greece, Theos turned into Zeus.
Zeus. So, do you think that the gods of the Greeks, they kind of turned into the Indo-European gods that were?
No, it's the other way around. The gods of
So,
Proto-Indo-Europeans.
so you mean that gods of the uh, Indo-European turned into Greek gods?
Yeah, exactly. Only some of them turned into it. It's not exactly a black and white picture. And also, this Theos came to India. In the Rig Veda, there's the sky god mentioned as Dyasa. And there's noticeable similarities between the three gods. So we presume that Theos is the Proto-Indo-European religion's god. Also, there was a mention of the horse twins, which was there in the Proto-Indo-European religion. they turned into the Ashwins in Rig Veda. Another example is in Indus Valley civilization, we had this figure in a seal.
Which I remember about
Yes, they this figure had horns. It wore like a leopard clothing kind of.
that. It reminded.
Yeah, and it looks
God-
very similar
the
to
god
modern
Shiva.
Hindus, Shiva.
Hmm.
And so we think that Indus Valley civilization also played a role in Hinduism. And Shiva is originally from Indus Valley civilization.
That is really interesting.
Yeah.
I think even I, as a Hindu, and my mom teaching me about Hinduism and teaching me about the history of Hinduism, I never knew about this. So while researching about it, I was really, really surprised to know that it might have been originated from the Indus Valley civilization. Yeah.
And another a good reason of why there's so many gods in Hinduism is that
It was an assimilation.
yeah, assimilation of these three, the
three- the-
and
the-
the folk religions of India, the Indian subcontinent, the tribal peoples, and the local people. They also assimilated into Hinduism. So what happened was these Indian folk religions, they had every region, every small region had their own god, and they assimilated into the greater Hinduism, and we know that today as the several gods or incarnations of Vishnu, as the family of Shiva, or various kinds of things. Uh, Now coming on to linguistic theories. Yeah.
So, do you think that there are many similarities between the language Sanskrit and various other languages? Because Sanskrit is known as the mother of all languages. And
Yeah, we were taught that a lot. We were taught that Sanskrit is a pure language, purely originated in India, didn't derive from anything, and it was a pure language. I certainly was taught that in my NCRT books. But that isn't completely true. The more we researched into the history, we found out that Sanskrit itself is a hodgepodge of a lot of languages. You see that Sanskrit, and it was originally thought that all Indian languages originated from Sanskrit, but we now know that isn't really true. You see, retroflex sounds like I'd ask you to say the word tant
done.
and say tant.
Done.
Notice that when you say tant,
Uh-huh.
your tip of your tongue touches your teeth.
Teeth, yes,
These are
that's
called retroflex languages. This is not seen in any other like Indian language, like Dravidian languages, but this is there in Sanskrit, and this is also there in Indo-European languages. So that does mean that Sanskrit had some kind of relation with the Indo-European languages, and it is also true that some Britishers also found very similarities between Latin, Greek, and Sanskrit, and it was a really startling topic back in the day. So the ancient world is really very interesting, and yeah.
It's really nice to see, little connections that can be not proved, theorized, but for just intellectual pursuit.
Yeah, an intellectual exercise. So, moving on, let's talk about how Hinduism spread in the continent. So after the fall of Indus Valley civilization, we think that okay. Before that, I'll just say what two of the greatest epics of India are: the Mahabharata and the Ramayana. Mahabharata is a story of the war between two families and their conquest for for the most
Kurukshetra.
of India, and it's the longest epic and the most engaging one certainly. And Ramayana is the story of the god Rama and his save and when he tried to save his wife Sita from a king in Sri Lanka called Ravan. Yeah. So it's also a really big and vibrant epic, and these two are thought to be written much later, written around like 500 BC or so. But these are like poems which were just hymns, which was like recited and memorized in the minds of Indian people from many millennia ago. So, in this Mahabharat epic, we see that the descendant of the families was a person called King Bharata. Uh, this King Bharata adopted or like King Bharata is an historical figure, by the way. We know that for sure, and he had an adopted son called Sage Bharadwaj. Um, Either he was an adopted son or he was in the court of King Bharata. And what he did was he formalized the process of poet recitation and poem memorization. And this is where we can put a date that yes, this is where the Vedic religion started. This is where all the Vedas were completely memorized and formalized, and the hymns and everything was composed. And this is where we can say that yes, this is when Hinduism really started, and it was fleshed out as a religion and ironed out. And this was around like 1500 BC or so, and this is when the Vedic tradition starts. 500 BC, we see the Hindu synthesis happening. This came with the splitting of the religion into two groups.
For the Aztec and the Nazca.
Yeah, right. The Aztecs were the Orthodox Hindus. They believed in the Vedas. They believed Veda as the formal word of God and like the way of living. And Gnostics were the ones who were considered heterodox Hindus. They did not believe in the word of Vedas, and eventually Gnostics formed their own religions, such as Jainism and Buddhism. And this is when the Hinduism, the modern Hinduism comes. This is what we now refer to as Hinduism.
But we can't really call it Hinduism because it was a gradual process, I think.
Yeah.
And
It developed along the way to what we now know as Hinduism. And this also came with the golden age of Puranas. Puranas were like short stories. I'll just say how it developed. You see, the priests who primarily lived in the northwestern side of India, in the Haryana, Rajasthan, Punjab side of things. These priests, these Brahmins, they had at this point of time had no political power. They didn't have militaries or anything. When they started expanding into the Indian subcontinent, they discovered a lot of Hindu folklore, uh, a lot of religions, a lot of folk tales, and everything, a lot of hierarchies of their own. And they saw that the best way to convert them was to put them at the top of the hierarchy. So what really happened was these priests came up with the caste system. This is when the caste system emerged. Yeah. So to give a brief overview of caste system, there was the Varnas and the Jatis. The Varnas was the main thing. There were four Varnas: the Brahmins, the top priestly scholar caste. The second was the Kshatriyas, the ruler, the warrior caste. The third was the Vaishyas, the traders and merchant class. The fourth was Shudras, or the like cleaner type caste. And another one is the untouchables, or now we know them as Dalits. They were completely excluded out of the caste system itself. And because they did like physically impure stuff. And let me just say that this is one of the most abhorrent things of the Hindu religions, and I completely do not support this, and is perhaps one of the most tragic tales in religious history itself. So,
It's really saddening to see such a divide between people from how a, such a beautiful history about Hinduism where it comes from, and then you see a sudden divide between people and how people treat people who come from their own history in such an abhorrent way.
yeah, exactly. So, and this is the crux of it. This is when the caste system emerged. So, what the priests did was they went into parts of India individually. They saw who was in charge, the tribe leader or whatever, the king, ruler, whatever. They said they formed this vibrant story about these peoples, and they said that wait, you're on top, oh, you're the Brahmin class. And this is how they majorly converted all the peoples of India into this caste system. The ones on the bottom were the ones who did the physically impure stuff, according to them. They were at the lowest class, and so they were given this untouchable thing. And the highest people, the tribesmen, were given the Brahmin thing, and the rulers, warriors were given the Kshatriyas and whatever. They formed this whole folklore and integrated into the actual mainstream Hinduism. You see, what they did was, if the certain priest class, if they the ones who were traveling around India, if they were Shivaites or they believed in Shiva as the ultimate god, what they did was they included the local people and said that they had this god, their local god, and said that they were in the family of Shiva, their grandson or whatever. And if say the traveling Brahmins, they were Vishnu followers. What they did was they integrated the local god and said that wait, this is the reincarnation of Vishnu. Yeah.
Not Vishnu, but Shiva. We're talking Vishnu, right?
No. Reincarnation of Vishnu. They were Vishnuvites.
Huh.
So Vaishnavites, sorry.
Vashivites.
Yeah. So they told him as reincarnation of Vishnu, and say if they were Shiva followers, they said that this local god was in the family of Shiva. And that's how really the entire religion spread into the subcontinent. At this time, the competing religion was Buddhism too, and Buddhism had a lot of power at this point of time. But gradually, this overturned and Hinduism came out on top.
Wait, I have a little question. So you mean that because of some small gods from different regions of India, from the common regions of India, because of, let's suppose we take an example, which was the Vishnuvites you were talking about, Vaishnavites. So you mean that the Vaishnavites who came to these common regions and people that believed in these common religions, the Vaishnavites kind of included their own gods and just termed their folklore
Yeah.
god into
A reincarnation of
real god.
Vishnu.
So could that be a reason why there are so many gods?
Yeah, that could be a very good reason of why there's this
13 point. I'm not sure, but there are
330 million gods.
330 million
Yeah.
gods.
So this is how the this influx of huge amount of gods and the people classified as Brahmins, Kshatriyas, Shudra, Vaishyas really happened in the entire subcontinent. And this is where they also write Puranas. There were a lot of stories around these local gods and the mainstream, how they connected with the mainstream Hindu thought and everything. And this is one of the more vibrant ages of Hinduism. And for what follows is the classical period in around 600 BC, from after Chandragupta Maurya and the Ashoka till the Empire's demise. This is called the classical period. This is when the Indian subcontinent really flourished in both economy, in culture, tradition, history. They really flourished, and this was the peak of the Indian subcontinent in terms of like uh, in terms of global influence. And this ended with mostly Muslim invasions. So let's dive into that now.
Okay.
Another controversial topic again.
Yes, we have to be very neutral about it.
Yeah, exactly. So the Muslims were originally traders. They, as with Britishers, they initially traded, and Persia always had a vibrant trade history with India. So the Persians never really invaded India. The invaders really came from Central Asia again. The Turks, the Central Asians, Afghans, and everything. So they came and they mostly conquered India. One reason why you see that India is always the one being conquered is that uh, India was really a theocratical state for most of its history. You see, after the Puranic age, uh, the priests always held the most power in India. Compare it with, let's say, China. In China, religion was always number two. The number one was always the king. The state always had the most power, the most authority to control people. That's why you see most of the culture in China revolved around the emperor and stories involved in that sense. Compared to India, where religion was always the most important thing in the people's lives. Culture, their artworks, and everything always depicted the Hindu religion. And that's where it comes from. The priests always believe that the material world isn't everything, you see. And they always preached that. The material world should could be considered everything, and that's how that's why India never really developed that much militarily compared to its economy and culture, and that's why it also frequently got invaded by, say, Muslim rulers. And from around 13th century to, say, 18th century, India was mostly under the Muslim rule, and the mostly Muslim rulers were actually tolerant of Hinduism. Surprisingly, the only real ruler which was against the Hindu religion was Aurangzeb, famously. That's why a lot of nationalistic propaganda in India right now is against Aurangzeb, and uh, still, say, Akbar really was interested in religions. You see, Akbar always, yeah, he not only was tolerant but was curious about the religions too. That's why he makes such a good ruler too. Uh, he was one of the most famous rulers of India, say, beside Ashoka, and conquered most of India. And that is when we step into, when Aurangzeb's rule failed, is when we step into the British era. In between British era and Muslim era, there was also this which was era, which is like really talked about in Indian nationalistic circles. I'm sure we'll get a lot of comments about that too if we would have missed it.
We should really talk about it.
Yeah.
Let's start with
Yeah. So what happened was Shivaji came out on top with his fight with Aurangzeb, and the Marathan Empire colossally grew in both size and importance in the subcontinent. And they were obviously very influential in Indian subcontinent. And another interesting thing I like to add about the caste system here is that caste isn't always like um, fixed. A lot of people have this interpretation that caste is same as it was like say 2000 years ago, when that isn't really the case. Uh, People who did revolutions, the low caste, did actually do revolutions. They actually came out on top and they converted themselves into the higher caste. One interesting thing is that Indian nationalists, or like like Hindu nationalist people, they really talk about this Rajput caste. Interestingly, they actually developed from the Shudra caste, which is one of the lower castes. And since they had this political power, they gained political power from revolutions. They
were
became the
shifted.
Rajput.
They shifted
Yeah.
from the lower caste to
Upper caste,
yeah,
Kshatriyas,
Kshatriyas.
And interestingly enough, we know that in Shivaji's court, when he was being coronated, there was a lot of hostile intentions by the Brahmins and the Kshatriyas of that time period, because Shivaji, interestingly, was actually a Shudra, and he got coronated as king, and he's now generally regarded as a Kshatriya. A lot of people don't know that, but it's just an interesting fact. Yeah, so the Marathan Empire grew in size, but eventually it succumbed under the British rule. The British also, the British also,
We're shifting towards the recent past.
yeah, the
history
recent
now.
past.
So, when Britishers came into India, they just came just because of trading. They wanted to do trading with, Indians, get, because we were very economically, very
Strong.
during that time, as we talked about before. So they wanted to, have some really trading benefits. That's the whole reason they came into India.
Yeah.
But gradually it became very authoritative. But that's a whole different topic. So when we're talking about Britishers and how the authoritative regime slowly came into being, we realized that they wanted to categorize Indian history into something. And that something was often, in our terms, our way of life. So what they wanted to do is that they wanted to categorize such a
Yeah,
diverse.
that like reminded me of something. When the Britishers first came to India, they came as traders and everything. They were really confused by this vast conglomeration of religions, way of life, and everything. The Indian tradition, really. And so, to explain that to them, the first people that came up to them were the Brahmins. So they took the Brahmins'
Viewpoint
and took it to Europe.
Mhm.
And another thing was, since they were so confused and everything, they took it to Europe and imposed some of their own exaggerations and everything about the Indian people, such as this like sati thing, where the widow
Widow burns
herself on
herself.
the
When the husband dies.
yeah, when the husband dies, and they made it seem that like after every death of a man, this happened or everything, and they glamorized this child sacrifice thing, which didn't really happen here, and they imposed a lot of stereotypes into the European mind, which is certainly not ideal. But go on, what we saying?
So, as we were talking about before, Hinduism wasn't just Hinduism. It wasn't just a religion. It wasn't just an ideology. It was a way of life. It was diverse. It was, it consisted of various, levels that came together, assimilated, and became this conglomeration of culture, folklore, and religion that we believe in today. But when Britishers came, they wanted to categorize the stuff for their own, purpose. And what they did was they kind of simplified such a diverse way of life only because they wanted to understand it for their own standpoint. So, what do you think about that?
Yeah, with this also came a wave of what we now know as modern Hinduism. There were two main figures in this, Indian figures. One was Raja Ram Mohan Roy, another one was Dayanand Saraswati. Raja Ram Mohan Roy formed the Brahma Samaj, while Dayanand Saraswati formed the Arya Samaj. This Samaj thing is kind of like a circle of people, a circle of thinkers of sorts, a group. And Raja Ram Mohan Roy, he when he was trying to write his books, trying to explain Hinduism, what he tried to do was I don't like putting it this way, but trying to suck up to the Britishers. He tried to form the narrative to better fit, form the Hindu narrative to better fit European mindsets and everything. He looked at the ancient scriptures with the way that a Westerner would, and trying to interpret it that way. Now this Brahma Samaj also came up with new thinkers like Swami Vivekananda, one of the most greatest speakers on Hinduism, and another one could be Rabindranath Tagore, the Nobel Prize winner. He was also part of Brahma Samaj. And another figure an interesting figure I'd like to talk about is the Dayanand Saraswati. Dayanand Saraswati, he was once sitting at a temple in India, and you see there was prasad, like an offering to a god, like kept in front of the idol of a god, in front of Shiva, I think. And he notices that a rat comes up to it and just drinks the milk kept there. And Dayanand Saraswati is like extremely surprised and aghast by this, like, what has this happened and everything. Now something very bad will happen, but he notices nothing of that sort happens here. And then he goes on this what could be called as a journey of like exploration of Hinduism and everything. And he interprets like old Vedas and everything, and finds that Hinduism essentially is a monotheistic religion, contrary to what Raja Ram Mohan and other Britishers thought. And he like glorified the ancient Vedas and rejected the later Hindu writings, and came up with this monotheistic view of Hinduism. And this was since he was not really trying to suck up to the Britishers, he formed his own unique narrative, which was like the monotheistic narrative, of course. And this what led to the formation of Arya Samaj. And it was generally thought that Arya Samaj would eventually die out and Brahmo Samaj would come out on top. But the exact opposite happened. Arya Samaj rapidly grew in popularity, and Brahma Samaj eventually died out.
Saddening to see that there was such a big impact because of Britishers to our own way of life, and seeing the colonial structure of Hinduism that played, Hinduism as a world religion still shapes our perspective of Hinduism and the external perspective from non-Indians as well. What do you think about that?
Yeah, the Britishers, contrary to what Hindu nationalists say, had a very big impact on Indian society and the Hindu religion too as well. They really helped in making the India identity itself. If say Britishers never came to India, we would be like Europe, like a lot of different micro states here and there, every state being their own like state. And also one thing, one quote, a funny quote I remember was, 4 brown men were fighting once, and a white man came, and they the 4 brown men united and fought against the white man.
So that brings us to the end of this video. I hope you guys enjoyed it.
Yeah, it was obviously a history video. It could have been a little boring, but we still hope that you gained some knowledge from this video if you're still here watching this. And thank you guys for watching.
Thank you guys.